Hi, everybody. It's so lovely to see you all here. I'm excited to introduce our speaker for the lunch hour. I'm glad you could all make it to hear from author Meredith Russo. Meredith Russo is a novelist and public speaker from Chattanooga, Tennessee, where she was born and where she received her degree in creative writing and women's studies from the University of Tennessee. Yay. Her award-winning novel, If I Was Your Girl, was released in 2016 and won the Stonewall Award, as well as honors for the Walter Dean Myers Diversity Award and the Lambda Literary Award. Russo is a contributor to the New York Times, Radical Hope, Don't Call Me Crazy, and Meet Cute. Her second novel, Birthday, is forthcoming. Most of you should hold in your hands a copy of Birthday. If you didn't grab a copy, please make sure you don't leave without one. It's very special that Meredith and her publisher allowed us to have this pre-release copy of her forthcoming novel. She has thousands of followers on social media. You should follow her. She's very funny, where she frequently speaks about politics, gender, writing, and publishing. She is one of only a few prominent transgender women speaking to transgender issues and to creating transgender art. Ms. Russo's Athenaeum talk is co-sponsored by the Center for Writing Public Discourse and the Gould Center for Humanistic Studies. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Russo to the Athenaeum.
I think I'm good. Can everybody hear me? I get told to be quiet a lot because I just naturally have a kind of like nasally, horrible, booming voice. So it should work out pretty well. And you know, don't get it. I'm Meredith Russo. I'm the author of Birthday. I won the Stonewall, but like, don't get it twisted. I do definitely have 3 roommates. I do definitely have 3 roommates and a lot of like 3 a.m. panic attacks. I live with mental health issues. You might think, oh, she's got it together. No, so don't. This is me. But yeah, I am also one of those spooky, scary trans women, dare I even say transsexuals, who you've been reading so many think pieces and hot takes about in the flesh. And I think to start off our talk, I would love it if you would all come along on a little thought experiment with me, just like humor me for a minute. We're gonna get very Hegelian as the talk goes on. So let's say one of you is a mad scientist with a grudge against me. Who wants to volunteer? Just raise your hand if you're just like, if you got crazy hair and you're coming up with crazy schemes. I'm coming up with ideas for who it might be. And after I finish this talk, you ambush me with an amnesia gun. Your goons, because you're a comic book villain, so naturally you have to have goons. Your goons load me into a black helicopter and drop me a nude tabula rasa into some remote but safe habitat where there is almost zero chance of encountering another human being. I wake up with my motor functions intact, as well as my more basic human instincts. You know, revulsion of insects, fear of snakes and large predators, an instinctive exhaustion with Twitter, desire for food and water, and a general sense of what one might and might not eat. You know, that it's good to sleep when I'm tired and so on. But everything I ever learned from another human being, whether firsthand, through inference, or through a cultural artifact, is gone. My first pair of questions, wordlessly felt, is going to be, who and what am I? My only answer to the question will be as follows. I am a kind of thing with 2 blurry noses poking in from the sides of its vision and a little hair poking in from above. It'll get annoying the longer it goes without getting cut. My outside covering is mostly smooth and palish pink, like a mole rat or an animal's tongue. What hair I do have ranges from purple, like some flowers I see, to silver, like the clouds just before night falls, to dark brown, like the dirt after a rainstorm. The insides of my thighs start to burn and hurt if I run around for too long, and my feet ache if I stand in one spot for a while, and my chest hurts if I jump around. My voice sounds like a lot of things and can mimic sounds in my environment relatively easily. There is one part of my body nobody ever wants to shut up about, and I can't say how blank slate Meredith would feel about that really one way or the other, but probably vaguely confused and a little bothered, but mostly she would avoid thinking about it when possible. There are berries to pick, after all. Unless I ever think to actively examine the still surface of a lake in my blissfully ignorant life of grazing on nuts, this is all I'll ever know. Am I fat or thin? Ugly or beautiful? Man or woman? Quick-witted or dim? White or racialized? Am I transgender? One can only answer these questions if, to paraphrase the poet Kanye West, one lives in a society. These only even become meaningful questions once you live in a society. And we as humans ask and answer them by telling stories to each other constantly, telling stories to each other and to ourselves. A gender, a race, a nation, a family, and a religion, to name a few, are all stories we tell. And in a fundamentally unequal society, spoiler alert, that's the one we're in a fundamentally unequal society, you learn a lot by examining who gets to tell the stories, about whom and what they tell their stories, and who is left to silently listen and be discussed. In the year of our Lord 2019, it's basically impossible to navigate online LGBT spaces without encountering TERF ideas. For those of you blessedly out of the loop, TERF is an acronym which stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist, and while they might tell you the term is a slur, I personally believe they're a hate group, and that considering them any kind of feminist is an insult to the movement. We work with the language we have, though, and not the language we want. This is all to say that a few months ago, while browsing Twitter, I encountered a TERF user publicly musing, "Isn't it odd? I've just been thinking, isn't it odd that transgenders are constantly insisting that we should date them, and yet you never see them dating each other? Really makes you think, doesn't it?" I read this and laughed and rolled over and showed this tweet to the woman in bed next to me, who, like every woman I have seriously dated since 2015, was also one of those elusive, mysterious trans women, about which so much is said and so little known. For the record, I doubt I could name a single trans person, let alone trans woman, who I know personally who doesn't mostly date other trans people. And yet, why are trans people never dating each other, makes you think. Political YouTube performance artist ContraPoints, in a video further exploring TERF talking points, addressed the persistent caricature of trans women as hairy monsters who want to strut around in women's spaces with our genitals flopping around, saying, "Why is it always hairy and flopping genitals? Trans women as a group are the most devoted body hair removers I've ever met, and they're also some of the least likely to want to flop their business in public." My last serious relationship with someone who wasn't a trans woman involved frequent encounters where she would bring me a story about trans women somewhere, doing or believing something nefarious, always recounted second or third hand, naturally. And then she would demand that I explain why we were up to this or that. Whereas I had generally been busy playing Legend of Zelda on my day off and putting my sore feet up, hadn't necessarily received a memo on the issue from the international cultural Marxist trans cabal, and almost always disagreed with what I was being brought. I've realized in the years since I began to publicly occupy a transgender identity, among other marginalized identities, mental illness being largely the other one, that for all the talk about us, hardly anyone really takes the time to talk to us, fewer still to ask us things and listen. And when they do, it's almost never about anything but this one aspect of our lives, or as a token mention in an article full of voices very reasonably saying that we shouldn't exist. It's all right to debate. The debate has to go on. It's just that you shouldn't be allowed to exist or go in public. It's just a debate. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how deeply embedded this phenomenon of being talked at and over is central to the way oppressed people experience our oppression. That while subtle, the effects of these one-sided conversations have profound impacts on our emotional well-being and ability to determine the courses of our own lives. And that these being the case, The need for minority representation in art and culture created by those familiar with the identities being discussed is a pressing and revolutionary responsibility. People will tell you that focusing on representation in art is foolish for one reason or another. Those on the right will say that consciously working to tell your own stories and the stories of other marginalized people is it's unnecessarily political. It's gauche. And they are tacitly admitting that just continuing to breathe and exist in an unacceptable body is itself political resistance in the world they want to see. But that's a story for later. Those on the left, which is to say people further left than the Democrats, will tell you that art and popular culture are, these are all the probably like the guys you meet on campus who like have a DSA membership and won't shut up about it, and they read Kropotkin, so they're like pretty sure they're more woke than you. They'll say that art and popular culture are frivolous distractions from the immediate material needs of subject communities. That you will not change the world by simply, making the institutions and archetypes of by simply diversifying the institutions and archetypes of an immensely brutal, unequal society. And while I agree provisionally with the second idea, in that I don't think, for example, that a superhero movie starring a woman funded by the United States military is particularly worthy of celebration, or that the world will be improved by having more trans billionaires or female ICE agents, my own experience tells me that we must take on this responsibility if we want to make life better for vulnerable people, especially young members of vulnerable communities. I can think of no better proof than to simply lay out my own experience. So here goes. The last time I stood in front of a crowd like this last summer, or should I say immediately after the last time when I was decompressing, when it was quiet and I was able to gather my thoughts, an image popped into my head. It hasn't really left in the month since. It's like this. Imagine a domesticated animal, let's say a house cat. If you're involved in trans Twitter at all, you get that this is a very funny joke, who one day takes it upon herself to stand on two legs, don a nice dress, reveal that she can speak and read English, and that she has a perfectly marketable little manuscript tucked under one paw. Everyone is very impressed with her, and in some circles, she's an honest-to-goodness sensation. But there's always a feeling at the back of everyone's minds, hers and her peers and her fans, that some violation has occurred. There is, of course, Air Bud-style, no explicit rule or law in society dictating that a cat can't be a novelist, or that humans can't recognize her for it, but all the same, isn't it all a little too odd? All too taxing on the credibility and dignity of everyone involved? Isn't it even a little perverse? Because while there are no explicit rules, everyone, including the cat herself, still knows that in this world of ours, there are places for cats. She should be lurking in the rafters in a barn, hunting mice. She should be slinking through an alley somewhere, looking for scraps to bring back to a litter of pathetic little kittens. She should be in the lap of a human, beautiful as any other decoration, purring in uncomplicated gratitude that she's being cared for. If she's going to be in the public eye, she should at least be staring pathetically out of a kennel while Sarah McLachlan wrings as much pathos from the moment as she can. But she's here, giving a university talk, or lurking in the corner of a fancy party, or awkwardly fiddling with a lanyard as she tries to find people to talk to between diversity panels at a convention, secretly thinking to herself that everyone would be happier if she could only drop the act and be a normal cat. And the sad truth is this: no matter how much the humans around her smile and shake her paw, no matter how loath they might be to admit it, the novelty is wearing a bit thin for them too. And really, things would be easier if she would just shuck the dress and find a lap to purr in. Everyone knows what a cat is supposed to be and not be because everyone has been told. And because outside of strained metaphors, cats just aren't very complicated. Their needs are simple. People are another story. I remember when I began to understand what I am, or was, or would become. It was the first day of kindergarten, and I snuck away during the Pledge of Allegiance because apparently I've always been a delinquent. Before that moment, I'd always either used the bathroom at home or gone to the women's room with my mother or one of my female relatives because I come from an incredibly broad Appalachian family full of matriarchs and men who happened to have wandered off somewhere they weren't needed. I saw a row of urinals for the first time in my life, gathered their purpose easily enough, it's not hard, and tried to use one. Something about this new perspective. My mom, up to this point, had opted not to give herself more cleaning work by making me do my business standing up. Something about this new perspective made me actually consider my body for the first time. And in considering it, I realized I was mildly confused. I already knew what boys had and what girls had, but for some reason, I felt as deeply and certainly as a child can feel anything that what I had was incorrect, that a doctor had performed some mishap on me, and I didn't understand why. Maybe this didn't occur to me until kindergarten, because had I been born cisgender, which is to say not transgender, I probably would have been a tomboy. And up to that point, my life had consisted of the sort of gender-agnostic, frictionless exploration of a rural clan of siblings and kind of endless cousins who spend their weekends wandering in the woods behind family houses. Me, my sister, and my cousins all wore flannel or dirty t-shirts with torn jeans and battered sneakers. We all wandered down dry creek beds and pushed over dead trees when we found them. It's actually really fun. You should even try it as an adult. We all threw our boy and girl toys together into grand genre-bending games of pretend. We all jockeyed for turns at the oldest cousin's original Nintendo, and here I'm dating myself. This was all the early 90s. So maybe up to this point, gender as a concept had played so small a part in my reckoning of things that I just didn't think it through. There were mommies, daddies, uncles, aunts, grannies, papas, and kids. And even though we took baths together and I knew our bodies were different, there was no pressure to dwell on it. Kindergarten was another story, of course, with all these children arriving from different families, with different rules. Some of them with much more rigid ideas about gender. And if you work with small children at all, you know that children are very, very insistent about correcting you when you're doing something wrong. Whatever the reason, it occurred to me then that I was different, and the idea never really left my head, but it also didn't exactly fill me with the kind of wrenching spiritual agony that you see a lot in memoirs and biopics. As I returned to class, I was mostly worried about securing one of the good, activity zones after nap time was over. It was just a thing about me, a piece of trivia, like a favorite color or a preference for peanut butter or brown hair. Nobody had told me it was a big deal. Yet. I remember the first time I was told about what I am. The film Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, released to home video in July of 1994. I was freshly 7 years old, in the lurch between first and second grade, already obsessed with comedy, a trait I'd possessed since I was 2 years old, when my mother and Granny watched Eddie Murphy's comedy special Raw while they thought I was asleep, only to discover me standing up watching them, and as soon as they noticed me, I started just saying swear words over and over again, trying to get them to laugh, because it made them laugh when Eddie Murphy did it, so surely it would make them laugh when I did it. And the Eddie Murphy thing might seem like a crazy aside, but he's coming back into the story later. So naturally, I had noticed the way every adult in my life seemed to quote Ace Ventura, and to laugh uncontrollably when they did. Even adults I thought of as particularly grave or serious would snicker when someone whipped out a line or a bit from the movie. If you're as old or older than me, it's probably kind of embarrassing to remember how much we were all into Jim Carrey talking out of his own anus. But at the time, in 1994, Ace Ventura was a sensation. You couldn't escape it. And being the amateur comedian that I was, I had to see it. We rented the movie, my family having a policy that with the exception of explicit sex, nudity, or gore, ratings were a suggestion. And even though I don't remember a lot of my childhood, I remember watching this movie. Jim Carrey was hilarious, of course, because again, how could any red-blooded 90s child not laugh at a grown-up talking out of his pants? The plot was largely incomprehensible to my little kid brain, but what I remember most clearly from the movie is Miami Police Department Lieutenant Lois Einhorn, with her powerful, brooding demeanor and her thick, curly 90s hair and her husky voice. She was the sort of woman a little 7-year-old trans lesbian waiting to happen could simultaneously daydream about both marrying and becoming one day. And I did. Imagine my surprise when our hero, Ace, discovers that Einhorn is really a man and proceeds to freak out, sob, dry heave, and desperately scrub himself in the shower as if he's been contaminated with some indelible filth. Imagine how it felt to hear that Einhorn was like this because she was insane, because, to quote her father, the lights were on, but nobody was home. Imagine how it felt to witness Ace dealing with her in the third act by exposing her underwear and genitals in front of all of her employees and then brutalizing her while those same employees, many of whom she had kissed, because nobody ever said she was like a great person, themselves all dry heaved and spit. The message I received was, people like you are insane, and anyone who knows what you are is going to be disgusted to the point of physical illness at the thought of intimacy with you, and it is okay to hurt you in ways that would be especially brutal even for a normal villain in a thriller or mystery movie. The adults on screen told me this, and every adult in my life seemed to have agreed and to have found agreeing incredibly funny. The next message I received, or cluster of messages, came from daytime television shows like Jerry Springer and Maury. Again, not necessarily something a child should be watching, but in an age before the internet or smartphones, before I even had a Super Nintendo, what was I supposed to do when I was homesick or stuck inside on a snow day? I was in 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade at this point, so I was canny enough to pick up on the idea behind these shows. Behold the human wreckage. Behold the walking disasters. Delight in watching their hapless peasant buffoonery and feel good about yourself because you aren't like them. There, but for the grace of God, goes I. This way lies disaster and inhumanity. And make no mistake, daring to be a transgender human was part of the freak show. Trans women were brought onto these shows with hooks like, my girlfriend is a man? Or, my husband is cheating with a he-she. Or, man or woman, can you tell the difference? These episodes often culminated in the audience openly mocking any man successfully fooled by a trans woman, or with a trans woman holding up a sign saying, I'm really a man. Sometimes men would attack a trans woman they had previously slept with or loved while the audience cheered. Sometimes a cisgender woman would attack a trans woman who cowered helplessly, and I only learned much later that these shows' security staff told transgender participants that if a real woman attacked them, they, like all men, would not be allowed to fight back. These programs, being guilty pleasures, weren't something adults in my life would admit to watching, but I knew all my classmates watched them on their days home, and they seemed to find all of this, again, very funny, and I was smart enough to realize that for a show to be on television, a lot of people must be watching it. The message I received was, you, little 9-year-old, are inherently sexual, capable of being more beautiful than real women, but never really a real woman, because you are a deceptive pervert. Men are going to attack you, and they will be too strong for you to meaningfully defend yourself. Real women are going to attack you, and you won't dare to fight back. No matter how many people see you being punished for the inherent sexuality of your existence, nobody will help you. I approached puberty, and my kind of nebulous, again, tomboyish androgyny stopped being either cute or tolerable. My lisp, my sensitivity, my habit of squealing with delight or stamping my foot and huffing when upset, all of these got corrected by adult men in my life, from teachers to uncles to even, for as good as he is now, my father. The message I received was, when a person with your kind of body is feminine, it is embarrassing, alarming, and inconvenient to us. Hide this, or even people you should look to for protection will mock, threaten, and hurt you. My public middle school career culminated in what we'll call a bullying event, where I seriously tried to fight back. Wielding those big novelty pencils you can get in gift shops? Wielding a novelty pencil like a club to make up for the size difference between me and my assailant. He was about 6 feet tall. I was a solid 5'2". And the school's assistant principal told me to be grateful I wasn't going to juvenile hall for using a weapon. Said that things like this didn't happen when he was younger because, and I will never forget this, Kids like you knew their place and knew not to make a fuss. As he said this to me, I was biting down on a cold rag to keep my molars in their sockets so that we could get me to a dentist after he was done lecturing me. The message I received again was, there is a place for people like you, narrow and painful, but probably livable for at least a little while. However, if you step out of that place, the reprisal will be immediate, it will be violent, and we must again emphasize that no help will be forthcoming. It was also within this time frame that Eddie Murphy, remember him, a comedy hero for as long as I'd known how to speak, was caught with a sex worker who happened to be a trans woman. Maybe he was just telling the truth about being a good Samaritan and giving her a ride home. I myself, a week and a half ago, had 5 cops show up on my porch at like 9 in the morning accusing me of being a drug kingpin because I let homeless people charge their phones on my porch. So like it happens, like, you know. Or maybe he is one of a great many men, despite what they'll tell you, who's as capable of desiring and loving trans women as any other women. Either way, it still hit home when, in an interview, he said, "I'm not sitting around depressed going, oh, people are going to think I'm not Eddie anymore. I'm not a man. I know I'm a man. I'm a man. I'm not ever on the 50 most wonderful list, but I'm not a degenerate either." The message. Even powerful people can be brought low through association with you. The sort of person who would willingly be with you without being tricked is a degenerate. Even if they love you in private, any reasonable person might lash out at you to protect their identity if things become public. I got older, and my access to both media and real-life experiences broadened. Puberty ripped into my flesh, and suddenly, even in the absence of bullying and social alienation, because I was lucky enough to get into an art school, gender dysphoria became fatally intolerable. I saw Silence of the Lambs. The message: when they aren't sex workers, corpses, or jokes, people like you are rapists and murderers who represent a potent danger to real women. I made female friends and lingered around the periphery at parties and in the cafeteria while the more traditionally femme among them fussed at smudged eyeliner and whined that they needed to fix it because they looked like a tranny. The message: the way you look is the rock bottom real women will use to measure their own beauty and value. I read Middlesex, and it's still vexed that it won a Pulitzer. The message: unlike the special, unrealistic, unresearched intersex protagonist, you are not and never will be the genuine article, and everything from your hands to the size and shape of your head will mark you as an unfortunate freak for the rest of your life. I tested the water with my parents, incredibly good liberals by Southern standards, by bringing up a trans boy who went to my high school. And they warned me not to get too close to him, that it would be irresponsible to get tied up in his issues when what he really clearly needed was therapy. The message: even good liberals like your parents who taught you not to use homophobic slurs and who were fine when you came out as queer will reject you for this. It isn't real, and it isn't something worth being respected. You're just insane. I read Invisible Monsters by Chuck Palahniuk, who's the worst, so feel free to consider this a call-out. The message: the very fact of your existence is as sensational and edgy as a real woman having the lower half of her face blown off, or, for that matter, anything Tyler Durden ever did. Being like you is a karmically appropriate way to punish men who are creeps, and all but the most desperate real women will see you as an insulting parody of their existence and refuse your company. I saw Boys Don't Cry for any trans masks in the audience. The message: you will die, and your death will enrich the spiritual lives of the cis people close to you. How nice. Don't you just love at the end of Boys Don't Cry when Chloe Sevigny drives off into the horizon, she sees the horizon line and smiles because everything's gonna be okay. Brandon Tina's in the ground for about a couple days at that point, narratively. I read Sandman by Neil Gaiman. The supernatural fabric of the universe rejects what you know to be true about yourself, and you will be a mannish joke so long as you're alive, but when you die, and you will, you might be allowed a little peace and dignity. Basically, every police procedural ever produced. The message: you'll die. Are you noticing a theme? You're gonna die. And even when you're alive, you'll be nothing but set dressing meant to demonstrate urban decay. The movie Soldier's Girl: if you don't die, And if you find someone who can love or even tolerate you, they're gonna die, so don't worry. Like, there was a glimmer of hope in college when, and here I'm gonna date myself again, I joined the Something Awful web forums, and for the first time in my life, encountered a network of real, alive, actual trans women living real, authentic, varied lives. All it took was a month of friendship with these women for me to break down into a sobbing mess and finally admit the fullness of what I was, what I am. They were, worried about romance and grades and making rent and finding jobs, and they had hobbies. The message I received was, trans women are human beings with some specific needs and difficulties, but the same beating hearts and souls yearning for comfort and meaning as any other human being. It was the first time I had heard anything like that. But then, while still mostly closeted, I decided to minor in women's studies, and rooms full of cisgender women I admired and respected, professors and students. And remember, this was a women's studies program in 2007. They nodded along to the writing of Sheila Jeffries, Germaine Greer, Janice Raymond, and Valerie Solanas, any one of whose poison could have undone every bit of good imparted by Judith Butler and Simone de Beauvoir. Their message was the clearest and worst yet. Even if you could be a woman, which you can't, only a pathetic, sexless walking abortion, your chromosomes and your male socialization have rotted the core of your soul, and you will never be safe to be around us. You are a living, breathing act of violation against the very concept of womanhood, an invader in the vanguard of phallic, patriarchal medical science. In the minds of real women, you will always be either a hairy-knuckled, bulge-crotched joke or a sex doll horror show with a deranged human brain screaming inside. It is our moral responsibility to make it functionally impossible for people like you to transition, but until then, you're on your own, unless you make the mistake of crossing us, like Sandy Stone did, in which case we can buy guns as easy as any other American, and we're not afraid to use them. And make no mistake, you may not have been paying attention as closely as me if you're cis, but you and every cisgender person you know absorbed more or less the same lessons, even if you didn't mean to. Everyone knows what a trans woman is supposed to be, even if we don't agree with it. We are human beings, and we've been told the stories enough that in certain parts of our brain we know. But despite what girls on Twitter with anime avatars may have told you, we're a little more complex than cats. We're actually human, believe it or not, but there's knowing, and then there's knowing well enough to articulate something, right? So when I stumbled into the real world at 21, jittery, hopeless, and too depressed to meaningfully function as an adult, what had all these messages added up to? What was the takeaway? A series of stereotypes. A trans woman could be a corpse, a homeless drug addict, a prisoner, a long-term mental patient, a sex worker. Some combination of all these and any other station she might occupy could only be achieved through deception and would be doomed to end in calamity. A trans woman could not have a family who loved her and remained in her life. A trans woman could be a stumbling, tragic golem, a barely human monstrosity carved up by modern medicine. A trans woman could be a leering, lurking, strangely affected serial killer haunting basements in the shadows at the edges of summer camps. You know, the where's your big fat girl, Silence of the Lambs kind of thing. A trans woman could be an unself-aware, deluded, stubbled, hulking ogre, smeared ungracefully with makeup, simultaneously hilarious and tragic in the depth of her failure as a social human being. A trans woman could, best case scenario, be a noble beauty, all the more heroic and breathtaking for the few ways her body betrays her, moving through her inevitably short life with a high chin and a straight back, waiting for the day someone finally loves her, and in loving her, inevitably causes one of their deaths. A trans woman could be a capering, sexless eunuch with no real dreams or internality of her own who prances around the periphery of cis people's stories, magically imparting them with sassy wisdom. Needless to say, none of these even remotely matched the shape of my dreams. I wanted to be a video game designer, a teacher, a musician, an artist, or a writer. I was capable of imagining a trans woman doing these things, but I was also capable of imagining dragons and space aliens and the idea of uncomplicated human goodness. all pretty unapproachably not real. I'd never once been told any of this was possible, except for that one brief glimpse that got shut down. In the dark, vulnerable corners of my mind, I yearned to be a mother and a wife, and to be a daughter and a sister better than I had ever managed being a son or a brother. I yearned to have hobbies and interests and a job and a circle of friends. Had I experienced a trans woman in any of these roles firsthand through anecdote or fiction? No. I had nothing against sex workers, even sort of admired their grit and entrepreneurial spirit, but I broke out in a cold sweat when customers were brusque with me at my job at Blockbuster, so I doubted I could handle all the haggling, let alone everything else. I wanted to witness my humanity unfolding in the tapestry of society and communion, at once touched and touching, growing fractally as the years wore on. I wanted a full life in all its depth and texture. To paraphrase the conclusion of Tim Kreider's incredibly moving meditation on knowing what other people think of you, I wanted to submit myself to the mortifying ordeal of being known so that I might be rewarded with being loved. But here's the thing about being a trans woman, or really any oppressed minority, where your oppression is indelibly written onto your body. The more people talk to each other about you, the more they tell you their frankly bonkers ideas about what and how you are. The more of these stereotypes they push into your head about what you're supposed to be, the harder it becomes to actually be known, or to even know yourself, to meet even your most basic emotional and social needs as a human being. I believe this is the hinge on which almost all oppression swings, perhaps even the nature of all power imbalances. Power is the ability to describe those beneath you, and through their subjugation, to better describe yourself. Oppression is the experience of being described by people who know nothing about you and getting ignored or punished when you try to correct them. Violence and conquest secure and maintain a captive audience. The extraction of wealth, labor, and the deployment of sexual violence are the benefits of the oppressor's place in the conversation. So at least if I'm right, taking the time to worry about representation is neither frivolous, nor is it using identity politics to mask the injustices in our system. But right-wing critics of the idea are absolutely correct that it is political and must be political, because all of us have tried. I mean, raise your hand if you have some kind of oppressed identity in this room. Yeah, because all of us, and raise your hand if you've tried being nice, like if you've tried being the palatable one. Like, we've tried being nice and polite and unobtrusive, and look how it almost always turns out. Did it work? No. But what can we do? We should be able to tell our own stories, to carefully midwife new generations of people like ourselves into adulthood with a robust vocabulary of possibilities. But the people who benefit from our subjugation often actively work to make that impossible. Even when a decent publisher or producer gives one of us a shot, tokenism can render our stories toothless while the background noise of modern society drowns us out. Our own insecurities and self-esteem issues, themselves products of the order of things, present themselves as imposter syndrome, screaming that we're fake and not worthy of the basic human act of expressing ourselves and being seen. In a world where we know for a fact that the Nazis marched unimpeded past every cabaret in Berlin, and where no amount of funny nicknames like Drumpf or John Oliver monologues has put a meaningful dent in Trump's trajectory, it can be easy as artists to despair that we even can meaningfully change things. But remember that we aren't here to save the whole world, and even everyone like us, whatever your own identity might be. There's no reason for the bar to be that high. And it's counterproductive to judge ourselves on that metric. If your work touches one person, uplifts one spirit, then that's good enough. Certainly it's nice to affect more than one person, and with work, maybe we can get there, but you have to start with one. Like in the parable of the starfish, throw that one dehydrated starfish in the water, make that one difference, and then do it again, if you can, and again, and eventually you might look back and find a beach mostly cleared of starfish. It never hurts to be sly, to make people think you're giving them the kind of safe, toothless after-school special art they can passively consume and then feel high-minded and liberal about while learning basically nothing about your humanity, only to sneakily insert some good old-fashioned realness. I personally attempted this with my first book, walking the knife's edge between speaking to cisgender audiences and writing something I think I genuinely would have needed as a child, but I leave it to my community to decide whether I succeeded. Remember also that our communities are our strength, and that the people who exploit you have a vested interest in you feeling like an atomized, isolated, largely powerless individual. The line, "there's power in a union," can apply just as easily to minority artists closing ranks and working together as it can to electricians or welders. Form networks with other people like you who work in your medium. Collaborate on projects, maintain friendships to keep each other sane against the pressure of the work and the often bad faith criticism which comes with it. I know it sounds like networking because it is networking and networking is gross, but I mean, how are you gonna be kind to one another, focusing on restorative justice and forgiveness within your community when traumatized members fall out of line. Exchange notes on pay, the wording of rejections, and which places to not even bother looking for a review. Link arms and lock heels when hate groups engage in organized attacks against one of your number, because they will. It happens once every few months with some new trans artist or trans writer. It happened with N.K. Jemisin, a Black writer of science fiction, when she won a Nebula Award. They'll do it, and you have to close ranks if you want to make a difference. Most importantly, boost one another's work. Ensure it reaches as large an audience as possible. One of the right kind of stories could have saved me immense trauma and pain as a child. And good trans literature did exist back then. Stone Butch Blues was published before I was born. But how would I have found it? The internet and social media, especially as gross as they can be, are invaluable tools in this regard. It's important to remember that without them, there wouldn't even be a trans community as we currently know it in this country, at least not outside the major cities. And the same is, I'm sure, true for any minority that is small enough that outside of the big cities, you just don't have the population density to create a movement. And last but not least, never work free for others, but don't be afraid to release your own work for free. It's tempting as subjects of capitalism to believe that only those things for which we get paid have any value or mean anything to our identities, that you can only call yourself a writer or a painter or an actor if someone wants to pay you. But the creation of beauty and the transmission of truth are radical and immensely human, no matter what the bill says once they're done. There is power in the word no. Bartleby the Scrivener, in the eponymous Melville story, ruptures his employer's entire understanding of society simply by sitting still and saying, "I would prefer not to." In Lysistrata, the women of Greece bring their city-states' war machines to a halt by simply refusing to lie down, as it were. No is dangerous, and no comes with a price in social position, sanity, and sometimes even flesh. But no is revolutionary precisely because so many people hate when we say it. As marginalized artists, as people blessed with the loudest voices and clearest visions, it's our duty to say no so often and with such vigor that our protestations, our insistence on what and how we really are, fill the ears of our young and vulnerable so thoroughly that there's no more room for competing stories. And that's my talk. I hope you liked it. Thanks. And now it's question time, I think. Is it? Yeah, I'm not big on like rules. If you need to leave while I'm answering a question, it's like NBD. I am taking off this blazer. I forgot that I was in LA.
I have a microphone if you'd like to ask any questions.
Thank you so much for your talk. Really, really enjoyed that. A question I wanted to ask was whether this be positive or negative or just influential in whatever way you see influence, who would be an individual that you'd say has had one of the greatest impacts in your life, let's say in your most recent years?
In my most recent years, it would definitely be Casey Plett, who is the author of a short story collection called A Safe Girl to Love, and a really amazing novel called Little Fish. She also edited a transgender speculative fiction anthology called Meanwhile Elsewhere. I encountered her short story collection right when I decided to transition, and I think that finding it and finding the voice of another trans woman who was so like me and seeing characters I could relate to who were allowed to be flawed in ways that a lot of those trans stereotypes I talked about aren't flawed. Her book, and immediately after that I read Nevada by Imogen Benny, both of which are kind of seminal, both of which with Small Beauty by Ja King Wilson Yang are kind of seminal trans texts. And a lot of the trans women in these stories are, they possess flaws, but not the flaws of those stereotypes. They're selfish, they're short-sighted, they're impulsive, they're capable of being mean. And there's infinite other kind of exciting and human character traits. And encountering that right when I did was so beneficial to me. So if anybody's looking for a short story collection, which nobody ever is, they don't sell well, but if you're looking for a short story collection, A Safe Girl to Love is great, and you can read it for free. It's available on Casey Plett's Twitter. It's her pinned tweet, because I think the publishing house that released it went out of business, so she just put it up under Creative Commons. Does anyone else have a question? Oh, hi.
I was wondering, when you write, thinking about your audience and who might read you, does it inspire you or constrain you during the writing process?
I think it's kind of a balancing act. When you are a minority and you're writing, there's a tension because you want to create art that you would have found meaningful and that people like you will find meaningful, but you're also still an artist. Being trans or being disabled or being black doesn't make you not an artist, and there's an artistic impulse to kind of explore as many ideas as possible, and to really challenge yourself and to really expose yourself to everything. And it can feel a little limiting to think that you're making yourself into an ex-writer when you just want to be a writer. But by that same token, I think I'm lucky because in the sense that I write a lot about life in the Appalachians, and that hasn't been very thoroughly explored in the American canon. And life as a trans woman hasn't been very thoroughly explored. And so I think I was lucky enough at least to hit on two kind of topics that I'm preoccupied with that at least aren't overdone. So I can linger in those for a little while and then wait to get really fussy and try to break into something else. Yeah?
Sorry. So does it help not having big predecessors you don't have an anxiety of not, I don't know how to say that, of being better than your predecessors because you're groundbreaking?
Because I'm from where?
Because you're writing on subjects that weren't written on before.
Yeah, there is definitely, so when you feel like your art comes with a social responsibility, there's also generally a feeling of, well, there's probably someone out there who could have done this better than me. Why am I in this position? There's someone who could have done it better, and it can be incredibly hard to cope with what feels like that responsibility. And eventually, at the end of the day, you have to just kind of accept that, I'm here now, and I have to do this now, and we can work out ways that I maybe didn't do it well enough, or everything else afterward. But for now, I'm here, and someone has to do the work, so it might as well be dumb old me.
Thank you very much for your answers and for your talk.
No problem. Thank you for your questions.
So I think we should probably wrap up, but would you please join me in thanking Meredith Russo?
It was my pleasure. Thank you.